Hi there, and welcome back to the Beyond Product podcast. My name is Moshe Mikanovsky, and I'm your host. In this podcast, we're diving deep into what goes into making truly successful and impactful digital products. We're exploring the unspoken, the behind the scenes, and everything under the hood of product development. Today on the show, I'm happy to have an old friend and almost colleague. I'll get to that in a minute. Our guest today has a huge vision for our world to make every building we reside in, whether it's our homes or work, hospitals, or really any closed place, healthier. Please give a warm welcome to lifelong student of how good ideas become great products, Elizabeth Caley, or she sometimes preferred to be known as EC, co-founder and CEO of Poppy. Poppy is an indoor health company. Their products provide instant, accurate indoor airflow measurements for energy savings, sustainability, and occupant health. Poppy was awarded top number 5 most innovative company by Fast Company last year. There is also so much I want to tell you about Elizabeth, or EC. Prior to starting Poppy, she was the CEO of Meta, and we'll talk about that a bit more later, an AI company focused on accelerating scientific progress. In 2017, Meta was acquired by Chan Zuckerberg Initiative, Mark Zuckerberg and Dr. Priscilla Chan's tech philanthropy. Prior to Meta, she held executive roles at global tech companies such as Microsoft, Hummingbird, which is OpenText these days, and Firmex. Honored as one of the most inspiring women in STEM and as one of the most inspiring women in tech, EC is an active contributor to the Bay Area, Oxford, and Canadian technology communities as a mentor, advisor, angel investor, and speaker. She received multiple awards for leadership and academic achievements. Elizabeth, I'm so happy to have you on the show today.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's an absolute pleasure.
Excellent. And I did mention when I started this about how we were almost colleagues. Yeah. So I want to share this with the world. This is an interesting one because I don't know if it means something about myself or anything, but my second job as a product manager was at Firmex. And I mentioned before that you're VP of product management over there at Firmex, I believe. And I've heard a lot of stories about you, how you actually made product management really work at Firmex. And you actually interviewed me for the job. And I think the week that I joined, you left or something like that.
I hired you, and then I left to start to join Meta, actually. So tying all those parts of the stories together. So
absolutely. So I hope it was because of Meta, not because of me.
It's a missed opportunity on my part.
I see. But I've been following your career, and everyone were talking about you all the time at Firmex when I was working over there. You made a lot of great stuff there, both on the product itself, but also on the way that people were thinking about the product and how we were thinking about who are our clients, what are the problems we are solving, what is our strategic, strategic thinking behind creating that product. So your name was mentioned everywhere, only in a good way.
That's amazing to hear. It's good to know that sometimes you don't know when you leave an organization if you had the impact you wanted or not.
I think they're still talking about you until these days, so it's all good. And Meta that's another interesting story because we all know Meta these days, and really everyone Meta before it became Meta or before it became the Meta that we know, right?
Yes. Our Meta. If I can tell a little bit about that story, my current co-founder and co-CEO, Sam Molyneux, started a company called Meta with his sister, Amy Molyneux, back in 2010. And it was an early machine learning company. You couldn't call it AI back in the day. You would get laughed at. If you were serious about it, you had to call it machine learning. And I joined as their COO and then to co-lead the company with Sam as they were moving through Series A, Series B funding and starting to really grow the product they had developed. Fast forward, just before we were about to close our Series B round, we were approached by the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative by Mark and his wife, Dr. Priscilla Chan, and asked if we wanted to join, the company wanted to join their brand new tech philanthropy in Silicon Valley. Mm-hmm. And our missions were entirely aligned. So it was a very Canadian story when they launched the philanthropy. We were watching it on the news and we're like, oh, that's so funny. They're talking about the problem in the same way we've been talking about the problem for a long time. Like, isn't that a funny coincidence? And then we just went back to work because we're a Canadian, startup. And then fast forward to 6 months later, and now we're part of this philanthropy that was really, really small at the time. Our team was bigger than the team we were joining.
Oh wow! Mm-hmm.
And so it was really early stages, and really the goal was to continue doing the work that we had started, which was we had collected access to all the world's scientific papers, and I think most people know that's where all the good stuff is written down. It's all a written culture in scientific discovery, and we applied machine learning to it to help scientists make discoveries faster.
Oh, I see. Okay. Mm-hmm.
And then, so that was the nice thing about joining Chan Zuckerberg was that was being, we can now make it for free. We didn't have to sell it to anybody. We can now make it available to scientists for free.
Right.
So we spent a fair amount of time growing that and new products for the Chan Zuckerberg initiative. And then Sam and I decided to climb another mountain because we're entrepreneurs, and entrepreneurs always have to entrepreneur. So a few years later, we decided to leave. And then by a twist of fate, we ended up having Meta, our brand, our name, Meta.com, even kind of our logo, get transitioned between the Chan Zuckerberg initiative and the Facebook company.
Right.
And then they rebranded the whole company. So
what was your feeling about it when they did that? Were you feeling like, oh, that's weird, or proud, or?
It, definitely mixed emotions. Like definitely not something you would expect. A twist of fate. You wake up one morning and this company that you'd worked really hard on now has 2 billion people going to your URL every day. Not through what you built. So it was definitely one of those sort of record scratch moments. But it were their assets; they could do whatever they wanted with them. So
absolutely. Yeah. But it's also important maybe to note that they didn't buy you for the name; they buy you for the knowledge and for the AI or machine learning, exposure and ability to help researchers really find whatever they wanted in all of those different papers. So,
a funny little story on that I haven't told folks before. But we had Meta.com. We also owned Meta.org, etc. And after the acquisition, they're like, "Oh, I think we can get rid of Meta.com now. I think we can probably sell that domain because we're a philanthropy and we only want the .org." I'm like, "Are you sure you don't want to hold on to it?" Because at the time, Facebook was competing against a virtual reality company named Meta. I'm like, you probably don't want to put it in the hands of your competitor. So, we might as well just hold on to it. And luckily, fortunately for them, I got my way and we kept it. So they still had it to then use down the road.
They should give you like some big check just for that advice there. But no, that's it's always fun to hear these type of stories, because I remember when they changed the name, and I think you even posted about it back then, and I saw that on LinkedIn, I believe. I remember vaguely that I saw something like that, and I was like, oh wow, this is really interesting, how this come to be, someone that and they actually was in this situation in this company. That's very interesting. But today I really want to talk with you about Poppy and about your current venture, because this is a really exciting one and very interesting one. So tell us a bit how you got to even this area, and explain a bit also what Poppy is doing.
Yeah, I'm happy to. Maybe to pick up where we were just talking about, we decided to tackle a new adventure together. Sam and I, we lead together very well, at least we think so. And the other thing we had decided is that we want to do some things the same and some things differently than what we had done before. And a co-leadership model is always, I think, successful if you're continuously reevaluating what your goals are and what you think you're doing well and what you're not doing well together. So we decided we wanted to do something that was good for the world and that could be incredibly commercially successful at scale. So not something strictly in the philanthropy world, which we had just been in, and not something strictly just in the commercial sort of venture capital world. And so we started investigating, a whole bunch of different ideas and did our homework. And we're entrepreneurs in residence at SRI International, which is in the Valley, and one of the birthplaces of innovation, including the first nodes of the internet all happened at SRI. and got access to some of the world's leading engineers and scientists who work for that organization and ran every idea by them, being like, what's almost ready for prime time? What can we apply our superpowers to, which is commercialization and scale, without having to do 5-10 years worth of R&D work. And the statistic that really motivated us was one that was certainly bubbling up with the mission at Chan Zuckerberg, which was to cure all diseases by the end of the century. Almost 50% of what anybody gets sick with in a year is a respiratory illness. And so almost 50% of the global burden of disease is something we catch, and most often from the air, from being indoors with other people. And so we sort of started to fall in love with that statistic, that problem, and said, what if we didn't look at creating a new drug, creating a medical device, figuring out how to create a vaccine, even though Sam and a lot of our collaborators were biologists by training. What if we actually took a different tact on it and we said, what if we, instead of trying to cure or prevent what makes people sick, we try and cure or prevent the buildings that make them sick, and bring that biotech into the world of prop tech, and tackle the problem in a way that hopefully helps stop outbreaks and all sorts of things. So we started off on, that was our favorite idea, and research proved out that, the technology was close to being there from a commercialization point of view. We started working with cruise ships. We started working with long-term care homes, etc. And then about 6 months later, the pandemic broke out.
So was that an opportunity, or was that as opportunity as in let's check if there is COVID in the air, or was that you already were focusing on another area and now you have to add it to the mix?
Yeah, it was like all of a sudden you wake up and every single person needs your product.
That is a huge opportunity.
Yeah, exactly. So, there was a lot to do. We were in very early stages. We had built our first device, which is this guy here. So it basically sits on the wall, collects air. It's incredibly quiet, so it can sit in a boardroom or a meeting room or a patient's room without driving them nuts. And we essentially collect from the air and collect particles on the surface of these electronic keys, and then use that to analyze using a technique at the time called metagenomic analysis, all the viruses, bacteria, fungi, molds that are in the air, and then basically presented that to people, being like, hey, here's what's in your air and what you should do about it. But that's expensive to do at that stage, and probably for the next 5 to 10 years, it's still going to be very expensive to do that at any kind of scale.
Expensiveness is from what? The different analysis that you have to do for each one of those issues in the air, or is it not yet available? Or is it because the network that you have to create to make that happen?
Yeah, the answer to that question is multifold. I'll try and keep it simple. It's partially the logistics. So doing metagenomics, doing a genomic analysis, basically a DNA RNA test on outside of a medical environment or a lab, is not yet perfected, and it usually involves liquid and electronic machines, tricky. But we were exploring and prototyping a whole bunch of things that way. And if you weren't going to do something actually on the device, that meant you had to ship something to a lab. And that involves, more hands-on processing, the shipping costs, et cetera. Yeah. But you could definitely get it to the point where we hit a price point that many people were fine with. But it was we wanted to really do something at the mass market and let every school with no budget be able to know it was in there.
Makes sense.
So we kept pushing the boundary on what was actually useful information and what could we do at a price point that was democratized and not just available to government contractors or the super wealthy.
Right. Yeah. So just for me to understand also a bit more about, where is the analysis done? Is it done at the machine itself and then it's being sent to my phone, or is it done by sending the information back to your servers? You do all the analysis and then you create some report or alarms or whatever it is. Because to me, when I see it, it reminds me of carbon monoxide alarm. But those are immediate. They just beeps, right? They don't do more than that.
So that's a big difference. One of the many differences between version 1 and version 3. There was something in the middle, but these are real-time sensors now. But what we're trying to do, what we found out through the entire process, is that we need to think about the problem a little bit differently based on what people were doing with the information we were giving them. So the version 1 product was shipped to a lab, and then the lab results were uploaded. And we analyzed them in our system using machine learning, and then presented the results to people online.
I see.
It still had to be done by a human in a lab. Versus this one, where now it's automatic. It takes measurements and readings every 5 seconds, 15 seconds, depending on how you want to set it up. And then that automatically gets uploaded as an IoT device to the cloud and shows up on people's dashboards. So that was a big leap that we made in the product development, one of several.
Yeah, and I'm sure, this leap also sounds to me like, normal product management and product development, where you have proof of concepts that are not so scalable to automation that becomes much more scalable and much more real time.
Yes. Yeah. I think what really drove, besides people just saying, I want it faster, is what we learned about what people would do with the information. And I don't know if anybody else is making products during the pandemic that had a little bit to do with what was going on in the pandemic, but people's sentiments were changing daily. How people were, understanding what was going wrong with the problem. Scientists have been making a lot of progress, but it was taking a long, like how coronavirus worked. But that wasn't reaching the public or the people who were managing buildings very, very consistently. Whether people wanted to mask, whether people wanted to do contact tracing, whether people wanted to tell people to, who felt sick, to stay home. We were working all across the world with the first version of the device, and we were finding, very, very different approaches and sentiments on almost a weekly basis. But it all came down to one thing. When you read through the noise of we want the information faster, which led us to, push on the real time. It was also what people weren't doing different things depending on what we found. Depending if it was coronavirus or something else, it really came down to, how do I pandemic proof my building? How do I assume there's a sick person in the building at all times? Because I can't control it anymore as a building manager, as an office manager, as the CEO of a company. People are going to be coming to work and they're going to be sick, and we're not going to know, or they're not going to know. And how do I make sure that I'm doing things proactively, not after the fact, once we find that there is something in the air that can make other people sick? Right. And so that led us to a different approach, which was a little less about the biology, a little bit more about aerosol science, which was counting and understanding particles and how well virus-sized particles get cleared from a room. Again, assuming that, what we're breathing out is essentially what's making other people sick. And there's the ability to be able to, without saying it's this biological strain, just saying this is what's actually going on in this space. And then if you increase, treat your room in all sorts of different ways, purifiers, HEPA purifiers, MERV filters, more fresh air, then you're going to be treating whatever virus is in the air. You're going to be basically reducing for everybody in the room. So that was the other big shift, in less about what was in the room and more about when and where things were potentially in the room.
So if I understand it clearly, you found through this research and through that experience that looking at the consistency of the air, what's in the air, it's not necessarily that you have to find each biological particle in it, or I'm probably not using the right words there, but each biological agent, but rather what are the quality of the air, and what are different particles that go through the air. And from that, you could actually derive what biological agent could be there.
Or it doesn't even matter which one. As we were presenting the information to people, they were taking exactly the same actions. If we told them there was increased flu or Pseudomonas or COVID, what's the solution? What's the passive sort of stuff that can be done by building managers in the background that has the biggest impact? That's just changing your air and filtering your air, diluting it and purifying it. And so There's definitely some use cases that we're continuing to build on where knowing what it is, people do take different actions. So we're applying machine learning to detecting wildfire smoke versus something like cigarette smoke or vaping. So schools really want to know if people are smoking or vaping in the bathroom.
Right.
But that has to be distinguishable from Axe body spray or hairspray or deodorant or something else going on in the space. So sometimes what it is really important, but for the most part, when it comes about making people sick, again, at a mass scale, it's really about just clearing out whatever's there.
I see. Interesting. That's very interesting because, I mean, I'm trying to also associate that with other type of solutions for other type of problems. And to me, it's almost like, that saying, don't fall in love with the solution, but with the problem, where the solution here is not necessarily understanding each biological agent that you have in the air, but more of what make the air cleaner and then for healthier. And that will already solve that problem anyway. Right?
Yes. And what we really do feel like we've done is make the invisible visible. That continues to be sort of our mission. And that is, is the air clean? But that's also things like, how does the air travel? And that leads, so we've developed a lot of techniques and do a 3D rendering of the building, overlay our data on top of it. And so the things that you saw that were sort of animations or illustrations like the New York Times did during the pandemic of like, this is how viruses we're actually doing that with numbers from that building and data from that building. And even just visualizing the information in a way that it's really easy for the people who, have ways of fixing it in 3D, that was one of the breakthroughs as well for us. So how air travels, and especially how it travels in what we call the breathing zone, which is, between usually 3 and 6 feet off the floor. That really is the essence of, a whole bunch of decisions that happen on health, but also what we found through sustainability and energy use.
Oh, interesting. That's so interesting. I guess this is also the height of people, right? Between 3 to 6 feet. It's just that's where people are, or is that just where air flows in general?
No, that's where people are breathing. So the technical definition is lower. And when we do schools, so we've done a lot of pre-K classrooms and stuff, we measure lower than we normally do.
Makes sense.
Closer to the ground.
Yes.
I think the technical definition is even like 2 feet, 2 inches off the ground because people could be doing yoga, I guess. But for practical day-to-day purposes, it's sort of like between 3 and 6 feet.
So you mentioned that you mentioned a lot of commercial buildings, like office buildings, schools, cruise ships. Is it also commercially available for anyone? Like if I would want to put it in my house, is that possible?
So it's definitely possible. We are focused on the commercial market, but we're doing it in 2 ways. What we're doing directly, we've used the technology everywhere. We've used the technology and proven it out in a royal palace, and super yachts, and hospitals, and schools, and everything in between, factories, warehouses, basically everywhere. The technology is universal, and including residents. Multifamily residential and single family homes as well.
Right.
What we're focused on from a sales point of view, because of the way we're funded and the way we want to scale, is on selling to building owners, as well as building management companies and large tenants. So, a Fortune 100 company or 1,000 company that wants to make sure their employees stay safe.
Right.
We have partners, though. We've basically just launched a new version of the product, all the same hardware, just a slight modification to the software side, where we actually certify and train HVAC, usually HVAC folks or other people, to do the tests themselves with a portable kit.
Interesting.
And so that's gaining more legs, especially in things like multifamily residential, where they're going to just put the kit it's basically a bag with everything you need in it and a software app, and they put it in the back of their truck, and then every time they visit a new building, they can do a test.
I see. And where is the unit actually installed? Is it like in several rooms, or is it next to the HVAC system, so it's centralized?
Yeah, for the installed version, it's typically 1 every 5,000 square feet. But again, sometimes people want to see the data more granular. corner office we really want to know, or the boardroom we really want to know. So it's smaller than that, but we'll put a
I
sensor in
see.
there. But we also, a lot of traction we have right now is for the non-installed version, basically the portable version, where we come in or a partner comes in, like an HVAC provider, with this kit, set it up, basically 4 sensors on a tripod, and then take measurements and then move it to another part of the building and then do that a few times a year just to make sure that everything's staying on track.
Oh, I see. So it's not permanently there. It's just coming in for audits and stuff like that. I actually changed our HVAC system in our house, and we did here in Ontario. We have you're in Ontario also right now. We have this government funding for reduce electricity usage and more sustainable solutions, energy-wise solutions. Yeah. So we had an auditor that came and measured our house for, energy consumption. I would think that something like that can actually work with government grants to make buildings healthier, and therefore there will be less. It's a preventative. There will be less people going to the hospitals or to their doctor offices, especially in a country like Canada that healthcare is is public. Is that something that you're thinking as well?
Yeah, so definitely government funding is something we're tracking very closely. We are also part of writing a new international building code standard, which is going to take time to roll out, but will potentially roll out to all 130 member countries over the next few years. There's government funds being allocated in a couple of different ways in different places. In the US, the Biden administration just earlier this week announced $2 billion worth of funding for indoor air safety and monitoring. And so those are the kinds of things that are starting to be addressed. Some of them are being done by the Energy Department. Some of them are being done by health authorities or CDC. So where people are thinking this problem lies is usually at the intersection of a couple of different places. But new building inspections, handovers. The real goal here is to have the new standard, which is called ASHRAE Standard 241, to become a standard way in which all buildings are operated. It covers both residential and commercial buildings with slightly different criteria, but it basically, of the 2 trillion indoor square feet we have on the planet, the goal is to basically have all of them make sure people don't get sick, but also from our data shows that we're also not just wasting a huge amount of energy because we're over ventilating in certain parts of our buildings as well.
Right. ASHRAE Standard 241, Poppy was instrumental in actually making that happen, right?
Well, we were a part of it. It's a very big committee, but it came about when the White House asked last December. The White House asked the group ASHRAE, which is essentially the body that regulates heating and cooling and air conditioning in buildings around the world, to develop a new standard to basically pandemic-proof buildings for the future. And as the White House put pressure on to develop a standard faster than it had ever been developed before. So instead of typically 2 years or longer, it was done in 6 months. And it's essentially experts from all over the world. I think we were represented, my co-founder Sam was on one of the subcommittees that was like, how do we actually measure and do the test? Because that's our expertise. And I think we were one of 3 Canadians, but the goal or the end result was basically a standard that sits alongside a couple of other standards that basically are used to figure out how to operate most of the buildings you spend your time in right now. And that's like an ASHRAE 90.1, which is about energy use in buildings, 62.1 and 62.2, which are about enough fresh air coming into the buildings and clearing out things like CO2. So the idea is that these sort of 3 standards together should be the way every single building gets run.
Yeah. Now, what about things like, the air quality inside airplane, for example? Because that was one of the concerns for people traveling through COVID and also after. But then I heard some rumors that it's actually safer to be in an airplane than to be in a building because of the ventilation that they have and how they push the air in. And, from someone that knows the insides on this, tell us a bit what you know about that.
Yeah, I love this topic. We are very lucky that one of our scientific advisors is somebody who did all of this testing in an academic sense. He's a very vetted researcher, Dr. Josh Santarpia. He did a lot of this research for the US government at the beginning of the pandemic and even before the pandemic, using the technique we use, which is called tracer, where we essentially add particles to the air and then use the sensors to figure out where they go and how quickly they're cleared. He basically did that on a whole bunch of different Boeing jets, and did all the baseline measurements that showed the world what was actually going on planes, and showed the U.S. government what was going on planes, so that the planes continued to operate during the pandemic. And it's a two-sided story, though. When planes are at altitude, they've got the highest air change rate of almost any place you would normally be. Higher than an operating room, typically.
Oh, wow.
But when you are getting onto the plane and on a gangplank, and when you're taxiing, that's not the air change rate that you get. And usually, especially on those gangways and whatever, you're not getting any air on those. So it's a good news, bad news stories for airplanes. But it's some of the leading work that he did with his team that really led to this explosion of the technology in the industry.
When I was, researching towards this episode and talking with you before, I was very kind of like, where do I put your technology in which brackets? And, we always like to make sure we understand where it falls. Is it health tech? Is it biotech? Is it something else? Where do you place it? And maybe it's not that important, but some people still looking for stuff like that.
Yeah, it's important to venture capitalists. VCs want to put in a specific bucket. I think at the beginning of the company, the most accurate description and that everybody got was we were bringing biotech to PropTech, to buildings. Now, I think because, there's definitely biology in there and that's sort of at the roots of it. A lot of it is aerosol science, which is not a category that, VCs have put a name next to. It's not aerosol tech. That's not a thing. And because of what we discovered with our data analysis about, it's not just the health proposition, but it's a huge amount is the energy proposition. Almost 75% of the buildings we measured are vastly overventilated in many different areas. And buildings, basically that alone, the heating and cooling and recirculation of air in our buildings is nearly 18% of global energy use. So you want to talk about where we're dumping our carbon emissions. It's about making sure we're all very comfortable at 21 degrees Celsius on a daily basis. So what we found was there's this huge climate tech or environmental tech proposition as well, and started getting deeper into the ROI studies, and at the end of the day just found that it helped people save money, and so that makes it a little bit harder to place. So maybe PropTech is the best single category, but we generally tend to think it's regardless of what category you put us in, what we're trying to do is focus on the air and making that air, that invisible air visible.
But something you said over there is really interesting that I've seen before again and again, that as much as you're trying to be, make good for the world, create products that are making people healthier, et cetera, at the end of the day is the bottom line, how does it impact people's pocket? And I've seen different approaches also in environmental tech that when you're trying to force someone to do something, they may not do it. But when you, poke them in their pocket, they will start doing this. So is that what you found as well?
Yeah, I think that's something, again, as the pandemic was transitioning as well. There were budgets put aside to making sure that occupants are safe. But then obviously with the return to work push, commercial buildings, which are one segment of our buyers, are really, struggling to differentiate themselves from other buildings and have a stamp of approval from a third party that says, no, this is, a healthy green building, a healthy building, and so they were looking for those sorts of things, but it couldn't be very expensive because they, were dealing with all of the absentee rates that they are dealing with, right?
Yes.
So what we've generally found is we have people coming in because they have a climate mandate, or it's about CO2 emissions and their ESG goals. And we can show them, again, if for most of the buildings we measure, there's a way of being able to reduce that and help you hit your goals.
Mm-hmm.
Bringing down your energy use is one of the biggest cost savings you can have. Or, HVAC is, again, 60% of what it costs to operate a typical commercial building.
Okay.
And so, even just bringing that down by a third or a fifth or something like that is a lot of dollars at the end of the day.
That's huge, of course.
Exactly. Yeah. And then everybody wants the stamp of approval that they can also go say, hey, we've also made our building safer. Because what we're trying to do is get everybody who's overventilated down, and every part of their building that's underventilated up, and make sure everybody's in that sort of Goldilocks target zone. Mm-hmm. And that basically helps them accomplish, hopefully, cost savings, energy savings, and occupancy.
But going back to the health, one thing that is dear to my heart, my mother-in-law, she passed away after a complication in the hospital from a procedure. So she was infected in the hospital. So sometimes you're saying, you don't want to go to the hospital because they might treat you for what you have, but then you can get something worse that you didn't have before. Yes. So I would say this technology that can really help with that as well.
Yeah. Yeah, we the new standard, the 241 standard, does have a higher bar. That target zone is much higher in healthcare settings, and they've also done a great job at different kinds of healthcare settings. So inpatient treatment, outpatient treatment, waiting rooms, etc. They've gotten pretty granular of like how much fresh air should each person in this space have per hour. Mm-hmm. And that's really the basic. That's the core measurement part that we measure. That is the basis for the 241 standard.
I see.
And because so much of what makes us sick is stuff that is caught from the air. Certainly, there's stuff from surfaces, and that can be passed hand to hand. But the study after study after study that shows students in schools with better air ventilation and clean air are less absent, less sick days. Their productivity, their performance on standardized tests are higher. Employee productivity is higher. Recovery rates for hospital stays is better. There's just an overwhelming amount of evidence now that what we breathe, which is 7,000 liters of air a day versus 2 liters of water, maybe, and a lot less of that of food. Food and water heavily regulated. Indoor air, where we spend 90% of our time, and 7,000 liters going in and out of our lungs every day. Yeah, not much. And so it's nice to see it treated in the same way now.
Very nice. Which countries already adopted the new regulation?
So it's in discussion now in 13 different states. New York City, it could be a state or a municipality. New York City sets their own standard. Basically, it's going the path of the other standards where it's going to get written into building code and enforced by building inspectors most commonly. Yeah. So it's really nice to see the movement. It takes a while for standards to get fully rolled out. And the good news is there's a lot of, especially commercial real estate owners, who always want to be ahead of the standard. Yes. And so if they get points towards their LEED certification or their Fitwell certification or their other building certifications, which our system does, then they're all in right from the early days.
If you would have to recommend to new entrepreneurs or someone that is starting their ways in these areas that they have to learn all of these industries and to find people to even talk with and get involved with, from your experience, what would you tell them?
This is a wonderful question. I've been lucky to have mentored about 150 different startups in the last decade.